All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to see some familiar and new faces. My name is Janessa Jamo. I'm the Executive Director of D.I.V.A, Diversity, Inclusion, Values, Action. I started this nonprofit because I realized that Utah has a very unique racial climate and culture, and that there was a real need here to engage in these hard dialogues and conversations, to have a safe space where and a brave space where people can ask what would seem like ignorant questions in everyday social settings and just really empower people to learn the cultures and experience of those around them. So thank you all for being here today. D.I.V.A is my baby. This is my passion. I do not know what I would do if I was not being able to engage with people and learn about different cultures. Today, our series is focusing on Indigenous cultural appropriation. We have two Indigenous speakers who will be talking about their different cultures, the cultural harm, the cultural misconceptions and misunderstandings and narratives that are very harmful to the Indigenous communities. This is a part of a cultural appropriation series. So the last event in our series will be upcoming November 14th, and that will focus on the Pacific Islander community and the cultural harms and misunderstandings and appropriation that is done there. I'm now going to pass this over to any of my board members who are here for them to just introduce themselves, get to know some of D.I.V.A's team.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Blanton. I use the she series pronouns. I am D.I.V.A's Director of Content Creations, and I'm excited to see you all here today.
Hi, I'm Adia Estes. I'm the Executive Secretary for D.I.V.A, and I'm super excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Sonia. I am the Director of Grassroots Action for D.I.V.A. I just got off of a plane, so that's why I'm not looking my best. So I'm super excited though that I got to my hotel in time to tune in today.
Also, we do ask that all of our audience members, please put your pronouns in your name so that we know how to call you correctly. For some logistics of this meeting, we want you to utilize the chat. Please put on your camera if you'd like. As you see, come as you are. This is a no judgment zone. Please interact with us as much as possible. Due to the pandemic, we've had to learn how to work within this virtual realm, but we really want this to be a conversation. We want to have dialogue. This is the time and space to really be one with your community and open up and ask any questions. Come and communicate with us. That's really what we want. We also have like the hand raise function, the heart, the laughing face. Utilize those as much as possible so you can interact with us all. So I always like to start these meetings off by defining some of the terms that we are going to be using throughout this presentation. So what is culture? It is defined as the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. What is cultural appropriation? It is defined as the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another and typically more dominant people or society. What is cross-cultural appropriation? This occurs when someone, a part of an institutionalized community, takes part in offensive transgressions towards another. I like to go through these slides because I think when people hear of culture, they kind of just go to those first mainstream ideas that have been ingrained in us through Western mainstream society. And culture is very dynamic, it's very big, it's more than just a religion, it's more than just a look. It's all of these things, social institutions. So very good to know that. Now I'm going to pass it over to our guest speakers today to introduce themselves, Jacob Crane and Carl Moore. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Carl, should I go first or do you want to go first? I'll go first. Dadanestara Size Jacob Crane at hello everyone, my name is Jacob Crane. I am from Tsuut'ina Nation, Alberta, Canada. Currently on the Ute Nation's land, and super happy to share space here with the folks from D.I.V.A and everybody on the line today. And I'll turn it over to Carl Moore.
All right, yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, D.I.V.A, Janessa, for having us on here. I think it's really important to have this conversation. I mean, this conversation's when we're talking about cultural appropriation, about all cultures, because everyone has their unique perspectives on what it is and their own values. Like I said, my name is Carl Moore. I've been a performer of Indigenous culture since I was 10 years old, but I got into the activist part of it when Standing Rock occurred in 2016. Out of Standing Rock, I created an organization called PANDOS, which stands for Peaceful Advocates for Native Dialogue and Organizing Support. That acronym actually comes from Pando, which is the largest living organism in the world, which is a grove of aspen trees here in Utah. And we feel like that's just like us as human beings. Just like this tree is connected to Mother Earth, or Grandmother Earth, Unchimaka, rooted in Mother Earth, us as human beings are rooted in Mother Earth as well. And we're all of the same species, just like these aspen trees are. Created that organization, have been doing activism, fighting for Indigenous sovereignty, for political sovereignty, and sacred sovereignty. Out of that organization came SLC Air Protectors, which got, I would say it was needed to be autonomous from PANDOS. So it started another organization on two completely different boards, which Jacob is currently our executive director for SLC Air Protectors. So we're really engaged in climate situations, and also during this whole COVID, both organizations have been helping out with our reservations here in Utah and abroad, helping with COVID, with food and COVID test kits and testing and things of that nature. So yeah, just a local activist, do a lot of prayers, fighting for a lot of different causes, all marginalized groups. You know, we're there for them, both organizations, praying and supporting. So yeah, thank you for having us. Quite.
Yeah, let me just back up and reintroduce myself. Sorry, I did the shortened version.
Yeah.
I do apologize for that. So I am currently the executive director for the SLC Air Protectors, local nonprofit out of Salt Lake City. And as Carl had mentioned, it was something that was created after Standing Rock. I was a board member back in 2016, late 2016. And in 2020, really at the beginning of 2020, beginning of the pandemic, I put my shoe in to be the executive director. And so I was appointed as the executive director. And then for the last 18 months now, I've been really doing a lot of Native COVID-19 relief work for Utah tribes. I've been involved with doing Indian affairs work for the past 10 years now. And so it's been a blessing to serve the community, which where I'm from, but not just my home community, but many Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. And so I'm super happy to share space today. I am going to COP26 in Scotland and this coming weekend. So it's the big environmental UN convention there, framework convention there on climate change. So super excited to be sharing space with everybody. So I'll end it there.
So involved in our community. Thank you all for your work. I want to start this conversation off by asking you two, what would you say is the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation?
Well, I'll just go here. I think that generally a lot of people think that that they are appreciating when they're appropriating. That's generally what happens is they think, well, we're appreciating you, we like what you're doing, or we're trying to emulate or mimic you. And I know some people say, you know, mimicry is flattery, but it's not. So appreciation is I would say appreciation is silent, really. Appreciation is silent. It sits back, it observes, it watches, and it knows its place. It knows when to not overstep its place. Appropriation is when you're loud and when you're taking over somebody else's culture, taking over someone else's sacred space, when you're entering in somebody else's space and you're being louder than those people. I think that is definitely appropriation and taking over. And so that's just my quick overview of those two.
Yeah, and kind of to echo what Carl was saying, I think the moment that you start to, oh gosh, just materialize native ways of life and incorporate them into what you're going to do, and just, you know, start to capitalize on that, I think that has to do with appropriation as well. And I mean, I think, you know, being, you know, understanding what the difference is, you know, it's a fine line for sure, but I feel like when you appreciate the cultures, when you're sourcing ethically from the tribe. So let's just use jewelry as an example. I'm wearing some jewelry here. So I bought these from a Native American jeweler, and I bought this from a Native American artist, and they made these beautiful things, bringing that value from outside the reservation to the reservation to help boost that local economy. That's really appreciating the culture, and it's doing it in a respectful way, shopping ethically. I'm not just going to someplace, you know, and buying knockoffs, you know, like these have meanings. Turquoise has meaning to the Navajo people, as well as many tribes in the Southwest, and, you know, the Southern nations there. So there's a lot of things that we don't really talk about, but you know, I know we're all consumers, and that's the thing about, you know, United States is it's like the #1 consumer in the world. And so let's try to cut back on that consumerism. But if you are going to consume, make sure you're purchasing from the source.
Yeah, let me add on to that. That you said something there, Jacob. You talked about capitalization, and I think that's very important. Is that our culture is people are capitalizing on it. They're making money off of what we have historically been killed for. Like our people have been killed for doing their ceremony. You know, our children were sent to residential schools to get rid of that being, and now we're being capitalized on. That's a big slap in the face of us as Indigenous people. So it definitely anti that consumer mindset, you know, that capitalistic mindset. I think that's something that we're fighting against regularly.
Yeah. I always say, I think a good rule of thumb too is like, if you have to ask yourself, if you have to stop and think about it, should I be wearing it? Should I be doing it? No, just stop right there. If you even have to ask or think about it, you probably just should not take part in that. All right, let's dive into the general misconceptions and misunderstandings.
All right, Jacob, do you want to start off on this one?
Sure. So Columbus in 1492 sailed the ocean blue and got discovered by a bunch of native people. Indigenous people found Columbus lost at sea, and for whatever reason he decided to call us Indians because he thought that he had discovered India, but that is probably that's not true. He was met by the indigenous people in the Caribbean, I believe, and it was just a huge mess after that. Colonization 101, you know, that's where this all kind of comes into play. There's borders that separate indigenous people, and within those different states, there's Canada, there's United States, and there's Mexico. I'm just going to use the North America as an example in this as I'm explaining this, but people called them Indians in each category or each state. But, you know, again, that's not exactly correct. They were tribes in these different areas. I'm Tsuut'ina, Carl is Hopi and Chimwevi, but, you know, within the treaties that we signed with the United States, Canada, and Mexico, they changed who we were. They called us either, you know, Aboriginal, if speaking from a Canadian context. They called us American Indian, speaking from a United States context, or they called us, you know, Aboriginal. That was something that was big too back in the day. That was something that was really big with the Commonwealth countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Great Britain. They used the term Aboriginal, abnormal, because we were abnormal people, but that's not actually true. We're human beings just like everybody else. But that was kind of what happened. And nowadays, you know, we've been reclaiming our power. We've been reclaiming our rights through self-identity. And we all usually, most of the time, people will say, well, I'm Native American. If you're from the States, they'll say I'm Native American. Sometimes they'll say American Indian. They'll say Indigenous as well, or they'll say their tribe, which tribe they're from. In Canada, they'll say, it's very rare that you'll see somebody say Aboriginal. That's like, it's like a swear word now, but they'll say First Nations, Indigenous, or their nation that they're part of. I'm not too sure what it is like in Mexico, because I haven't really explored that too much, but it's just interesting how it all kind of comes together. And so nowadays everybody says Indigenous. We very rarely do we say Indian, unless we're using Indian country, which is all the tribes in the US. That's a political term that they use to describe, you know, Native American people, all the tribes, all the native tribes combined, they say Indian country. And so capital I, capital C, Indian country. Yeah, so there's a lot of misconceptions, misunderstandings, of course, because of how we were colonized. I was colonized, but my people were colonized by the British and the Canadians. And so they, you know, Aboriginal, Indian, and then it was First Nations. Now it's which nation you're from, and then it turned into Indigenous, you know, which is more accepted. So we're in a progressive ladder, kind of defining on who and how we want to be, you know, self-identified or called. And so it's similar to the United States, where it's like, okay, you got Indian, you have American Indian, you have Native American, you have your tribe, and you have your, you know, Indigenous. You know, if you want to form more allies or come together, is we say Indigenous with a capital I. I always say you have to cap the I. Carl, if you want to play off of that a little bit, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. So me personally, well, I guess I should back up to introduce my background, because we are talking about culture, and I think culture is what this is all about. You know, I grew up in Utah County as a member of the LDS Church, and that was my culture. That was my worldview. That was my perspective. So I was primarily LDS, and that's important when we're talking about these things, because I have since, you know, been educated on what that did to my mind, what worldview that set me in. So when I was growing up, you know, when people would ask me what I am, I said, I'm a Lamanite. That's what I said. You know, Lamanite is the term for a Native American in the LDS doctrine, you know. So I always said I was Lamanite, and I was LDS second, and then I was my tribe like third. Like that came behind everything else. And at that time, you know, I used the term Indian when I was growing up, and then later on I learned, you know that doesn't make sense. So then I started calling myself Native American. It wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years ago when I started using the term Indigenous, because I like what Jacob is saying, is like Indigenous really has more power. It has more depth to like who we are. We are really, yeah, like First Nations. We're not like people will say, when I talk to people, they say, well, I'm Native American too, because I was born in America, so I'm native to America. So I stopped using Native American because yeah, it's interesting because that's kind of an appropriation in and of itself, right? Anyway, so I call myself Native. I use Native American still, but I like to use Indigenous or my tribes, Hopi or Chemehuevi. It depends on the context. And just to give another political term, like Jacob talked about Indian country, American Indian, that's who we are politically to the United States government. That's why you see American Indian on censuses. That's why you see American Indian when you're talking through the Department of the Interior. It's American Indian. And that's why American Indian movement, the AIM movement, that's why they call themselves American Indian movement, because it's a political, because they're saying this is who we are politically, is we are sovereign nations.
And just to kind of play off of that a little bit, I'm sorry, I'll take like one more minute here. That's like United States, America colonizing us, is they want us to include America in everything because America is the best thing ever, right? Since Swiss cheese. But they really want to involve themselves in everything. And that's what they've done to Indigenous people, is they've really ingrained themselves into our identity. And we've adopted it like fry bread. Like it became tradition to eat fry bread, right? But fry bread comes from sad times. That comes from horrible times. That's where that comes from, fry bread. And we've incorporated, indoctrinated it into our culture as people. And so the same thing kind of happened when they were creating, reservations. They were land grabbing, they were stealing, just killing Indians, basically, quote unquote, right? They put America in our terms of how we identify with ourselves to make it seem like it was that much better, but in reality, it's not. And I honestly think we need to move away. Again, I am from so-called Canada. I am from First Nations communities, Indigenous communities in the North. And so we got rid of our separation from Canada was long ago. And so I really think the states needs to have the American Indians, Native Americans, Indigenous people down here, they need to move away from that. But it's hard to move away from that because American Indian is in our treaties. And to move away from that, does that mean that they don't honor our treaties anymore? Or what does that even mean, right? And so it gets complicated. Anyways.
All right, let's move on to the next slide. This is how you led the conversation talking about Columbus. So we don't have to go too deep into this. It should be very clear, but still would love to hear what you have to say about this distinction and the harm that has been done.
Yeah, I'm gonna speak to this because I think that this is what Indigenous people were colonized. I like what Jacob brings up, like what the British colonies did, overtaking New Zealand, overtaking Australia, taking parts of Africa, taking parts, islands, and North America. That was Europe imposing itself on us. And the celebration of Columbus Day is it's just the acknowledgement that, hey, we came, we conquered, we colonized. And it's every year, it's again, it's a slap in the face. Every single year that we celebrate, like this is a celebration, this is a holiday, it comes from a holy day. That's a pretty deep term, a holy day for a man who came and didn't even land here in North America proper, and started the North Atlantic transatlantic slave trade, started the whole slavery, started, all of that with the Caribbean people. I want to acknowledge that, Salt Lake City, this is one of the things that came out of Standing Rock, because we got Salt Lake City to acknowledge that Indigenous Peoples Day. Well, now they couldn't get rid of Columbus Day because they're one of the biggest proponents for Columbus Day are the Italian Americans. And one of my questions is why would you want to associate yourself with a man so evil as Columbus?
Yeah, and then kind of going into like that all, like I think it's really important that folks support the Indigenous Peoples Day, because like again, like there's a clip that it just talks like there was like 4 guys talking, and there was an African American man, there was an Indigenous person there, Caucasian male, and then I think there was just 3 of them actually. They were talking, and it got to the point where they were talking about land or something, and then the African American guy like yells at the Caucasian guy, and he's like, hey, look, this country was built on the blood of Indigenous people, on the backs of, you know, African American people, and then you guys want to say that this was done like equal, like that this was fair, like there was fairness to that? No, there was no fairness to that. It was horrible what happened. It was genocide of a people, it was genocide of a culture, it was enslaving people, it was, you know, just horrible, the most horrible conditions that you can ever think of. That's what happened here in America. And they brainwash our children by feeding them that you know, America is so great, or Columbus Day is so amazing, and this is, you know, they brainwash us, and then all of a sudden our kids start to think and they start to believe in that. And so there's a lot of brainwashing happening at our elementary schools, especially the whole, like, I mean, I don't know. I'm very radical when it starts to come to this kind of stuff, because it happens. Like even pledging allegiance to the flag, like you're reinforcing the kids to think this way. And so anybody who talks out against that is not cool, and they're evil, and they shouldn't be treated with respect, and they need to be outcasted. And it's like, no, we're just talking about what really happened. And it's hard for some people to hear that because it hurts their ears, because they grew up in this system that isn't exactly true. And so having Indigenous Peoples Day is, you know, taking over, you know, Christopher Columbus Day, I think is really funny. But, you know, literally they're taking over that day and they're reclaiming it. And that's honoring Indigenous people. You want to honor Indigenous people. You want to show appreciation to Indigenous people. You want to practice being allies. Then support this movement, support this, and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing this because of where am I living? You know, where's my house located? It's most likely 99.9% of the time, if not 100, actually 100, it's on stolen land. It is on stolen land. This is the least thing, the bare minimum. Land acknowledgement, bare minimum. Supporting Indigenous Peoples Day, bare minimum. There's a lot of work that needs to happen still. So anyways. You want me to jump in first, Carl?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so again, this is like, yeah, you always want to buy, you know, from Native people. You don't want to buy from inspired Native. Don't buy from folks like that. That's basically colonization, culture appropriation, and capitalism 101, where non-Native people are making a buck off of Native people's artwork. That's what that is. That is just not good. You don't ever want to do that. Okay, don't be this person. Don't be these people. You always want to go and purchase from the source, which are the grandmas, the grandpas, the people on the reservation. And even in the urban settings, like there are arts and crafts, jewelry makers, artists, artisans, entrepreneurs that are Indigenous, that are selling their artwork, and they're having a hard time getting off the ground because of people like this, that are basically appropriating our culture, our design, our jewelry for a profit. And so you don't want to do that. You want to buy from the source on the reservation or in the urban setting, because usually the urban setting, these people have left the reservation to start a new life, and this is supporting them in that way. That's the story. That's it. And so I always say that you have to do that. And you know, you wonder why there's poverty on the reservations, because there's not a lot of job creations. And so if you want to end that cycle of that generational poverty cycle, start purchasing from the reservation to get those folks on their feet, and they can start a new life, wherever they may choose. And if they want to stay on the reservation, that's totally fine. you're supporting that economy. Anyways, go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, just a real brief. I know that some people can kind of take this too far. I would say take it too far and not allow other people to wear Indigenous jewelry. But that is a way that Indigenous people make money. And if they're selling it, you know, then that would be, I would have to consider that appropriate. I would think that the determining factor is, are you wearing the jewelry to pretend to be an Indigenous person, or are you wearing the jewelry because it, you know, and holding that, like turquoise. I mean, I'm seeing turquoise here. Like turquoise is so sacred, that represents the holy people to the D.I.V.A people. That's the holy people. You're wearing like deity on you. It's a symbol of protection. For Hopi people, it's a symbol of the sky, of the water, and the water has the spirit. You know, it's the water that has the life in it, and not the body. It's the water that has the spirit in it. So it's not wearing these things for Halloween. It's wearing it, you know, to really appreciate it. And I think that it's totally appropriate to wear it. Just be cautious of like, why are you wearing it? Are you pretending, or are you appreciating? Wow. So, but yeah. So the one thing about myself and Jacob is we both dance. You know, Jacob does grass dance. I do Northern traditional. And in both of those dances, you know, we're wearing regalia that is important to us. So I mean, I can talk about my regalia and the symbolism in it, the feathers in it, you know, the everything about it is definitely sacred. Like nothing that I wear is not sacred. Everything that I wear is sacred and holy to me, you know, and so other people, you know, as other people need to recognize that and allow me my sacred sovereignty, or allow me what is sacred to myself. And, you know, feathers are definitely something that are sacred. And so, you know, like we just barely saw this. I don't know if hopefully y'all have cool friends and have reposted, or you're following people where there's this math teacher who wears the cheesy headband with the multicolored feathers that are like right here, you know, and she's just up there hooting and hollering and doing whatever. And she's doing it to try and get people to learn math. but it's like, that, and again, to go to what Jacob's talking about, as children, we're brought up, you know, during Thanksgiving or whatever, you have half the kids being pilgrims and half of the kids being Indigenous kids, you know, and you're just wearing, they do these cheesy vests out of paper sacks or paper bags, or they wear these feather headdresses with just multicolored feathers. And it's demeaning to us. It's really demeaning to us. I'm gonna let Jacob follow up with that, and then I'm sure I'll come back into this.
Yeah, so it goes back to like, you know, the history of like cowboys and literally, you know, soldiers killing Indians. Like I'll say that. And then after they did that, they forced people onto reservations. After they did that, they took the children away from them to colonize them, to weaken the system. And then they put these reservations on, like, they usually put enemy tribes together as a way to keep them to fight. And then within those reservations, they would usually put two dominant religions. So that would always split the Indigenous vote, the Indigenous political system, whatever. And then they force these government, you know, tribal chairmen, this system that actually doesn't work for us. And then we've adopted it. We've adopted it like fry bread, and we've called it tradition now. And that's part of the problem, okay? And so how do we unlearn, or how do we evolve, and how do we get away from that, right? And so this is talking about those times, those hard times where people were demonizing our people. Like, look at these pictures, right? Like, as an Indigenous person, you don't want to be like that. And so you just want to cut your hair, right? You just want to bleach your hair, your skin white. You want to change the way you look. You want to take this off. You want to stop talking your language. You want to get away from that. So this is a form of colonization. So they demonized us to change us. Now they want to be us. So it's interesting how it all kind of comes together. And so again, like, it's about the representation. It's about understanding the meaning behind the feathers. It's about understanding what happened to Indigenous people and what they did to us. They really did a number on Native American people. They really did a number on First Nations people. They really just did a number on us. Now we're kind of coming back. And I'll say this until the end of my times. And I believe if I coined this, but we're in our renaissance as Indigenous people. And we're going to be in our renaissance for the next 100 years of reclaiming who we are. So
I apologize. I just looked at the dancers and the headdress, and I just went off on something that was a little bit different, but I'm going to speak to this slide a little bit better now. It's interesting, when I was started to dance, I really wanted to be the example of a person who is educated, who isn't a drunk Indian, who isn't these negative stereotypes, who isn't stupid. I mean, dumb, like uneducated. I will say this, that the education comes in many different forms. But as far as what is accepted by Western thought, we're talking about like university. Is like, I went to university, Jacob went to university. We have so many Indigenous scholars, people with PhDs who are doing work. Like we have Indigenous people, we have the highest percentage of ethnicity in the military, in the United States military. We are not uneducated as a whole, definitely, and we are not savage. It's interesting, I'm looking at this image here of Uncle Sam and an Indigenous person. Uncle Sam's feeding this Indigenous person. It's like this Indigenous person just like needs, and this is a stereotype. This is what culture tells us, is that Indigenous people, and we'll get to this later, but is like we're all just about free things and getting handouts and getting given things by the United States government, when originally it was Indigenous people who were giving the non-natives, who were helping them survive, who were essentially, we were digging our own graves, unfortunately, because we're accepting and welcoming, because our culture is civilized. Our culture is a culture of helping all of the people, all of the nations, clothing them, feeding them, making sure that they're doctored, helping them with their spiritual education. Those are things that we did as Indigenous people to other people, to European people, is we're trying to elevate them. And what do? They go around and they do this switch-a-roo and they take us over. And so that's more to the point of this slide here.
Would you want to talk about the drunk Indian and how, there we go. Thank you.
yeah, and so something too is drugs and alcohol, that was used as alcohol was used as a form of chemical warfare on Native people. Like, it was foreign to our diets. That's what they used to do to Native people to get them to sign treaties, is they would get them, like, not all, but in some cases they would get them drunk, and then they would sign away land, they'd sign away title to things, they'd sign away everything. They didn't even know what they were doing, because we didn't really have a form of, we understood what treaty was and then agreements were, but we didn't understand the way that they were doing that. And so there was a lot of shady deals that happened early on that caused things the way they were. And so keeping, the warriors drunk was a way for them to take the women, to rape the woman, to pillage, destroy the towns, do whatever, the teepees, the villages. That's their way of chemical warfare. And so the same thing with drugs and alcohol is like, that's new to us. Everything's changed since contact with the Europeans. Okay, our diets changed. Alcohol is only a couple hundred years in our systems, and it's going to take a lot longer before, we aren't allergic anymore. Like we just don't have those DNA moleculars, whatever, that break down alcohol the way Europeans do. It's the truth. We don't have that. Same thing with drugs. Like it's really hard for us to function off of things that are new, that people have been doing for a long time outside of the Indigenous community. And so a lot's happening at once. And so that was used, though. That was early, going back, those are hard times. But again, not everybody, is drunks and, drug addicts. Like there's a large majority of people that are succeeding, that are entrepreneurs, educators, engineers, lawyers, doctors, traditional holders, knowledge holders, pipe carriers, drum keepers, drum makers, powwow dancers that are just killing it. Cowboys too. We even have our Indigenous people that are doing becoming cowboys and cowgirls, whatever that movement is. We're everywhere. And so we're not just on the reservation drinking all the dang time because we have nothing to do. Like everybody works. There's a lot of stereotypes that like are just BS. And like, yes, there in certain cases, there are high unemployment rates. Okay. In certain cases there are, but that's because those folks, I would challenge to go take a look at what those folks are going through and to understand. And those are those communities that have been, decimated by drugs and alcohol. And those cases are starting to become more rare. And so as Indigenous people, we're pulling ourselves out of this warfare that we've been in for such a long time. And so things are getting better. I can honestly say from the time I was a teenager to now, 16, 17 years later, things are getting better. I can honestly say that, but it's going to take a long time before they get better, whatever. That's not even a word, but yeah.
So I'm gonna second what Jacob's talking about here. Is we've really got to get away from the stereotype. But unfortunately, it is true that there is alcoholism, there is meth use, there are gangs, there are bad things like those. But the situation, I like to compare reservations with rural settings, with small rural settings, and what usually happens in those small rural settings with our children, with the youth, that kind of situation is kind of the situation that is on reservations. I mean, here reservations are foreign concepts to us as Indigenous people. I mean, like being stuck in a place where we weren't traditionally, usually, or being stuck in a place where we can't live like we've historically lived. We can't provide for our families the way that we historically have provided. It's all foreign. And so depression has been a big part of the Indigenous experience. I mean, how would you feel? How would your culture feel, if you were shoved in a corner, if you were portrayed as the bad person in the films, in the Cowboys and Indians films? How would you feel if you were always the bad, always getting beaten down, always the negativity, always like wanting handouts, whatever it is? How would you feel? But like Jacob has said, there has been movements, and I already mentioned one of them, the American Indian movement. We're going from, our parents were sent to residential schools. Our parents were taught to hate themselves, basically internalized racism. Our parents were taught those things too. Now we're building ourselves up. We're getting that culture back. Sundance has come back. Dances have come back. Powwow has come back. And we're getting stronger, and we're teaching our youth. Language is coming back. All of those things are coming back, and they are making us stronger, which is a positive thing.
And lastly, somebody mentioned something about generational trauma or intergenerational trauma. That is a real thing. I think a large part of Indigenous people are suffering from intergenerational trauma. and they go their whole entire life without understanding what that is or acknowledging that. And so I've seen it happen both ways, where people don't acknowledge it and they live great lives. I've seen people who do acknowledge it and they live great lives. It all depends on how you want to deal with it and how you want to move forward. And if it's something that you need to deal with, take some time, stop, take some time to acknowledge that you're suffering from intergenerational trauma, which is generational trauma, and that you need to do something to deal with that. Because if you don't, in some cases, it could affect you later on in life. Okay.
Yeah, mental health, physical health, these are all things that are just new. And the situations that we're dealing with are all new situations. Let's make that clear. These are all new situations. So when people criticize us for being whatever, we're dealing with something that is very new to us. I'm going to talk. I love this because I used to actually wear Cleveland Indians hats all the time. Again, I grew up in Utah County. I wasn't educated on what mascots do, like how they do violence to Indigenous people. I wore that Indians hat proudly. I thought that it represented me. I like to smile like Chief Yahoo. I did this. One thing that people need to understand something is that this does harm to us as Indigenous people, because when we see these images, if you see the images of, the Redskin, the Brave, the Blackhawk, when we see those things, that gets embedded into us, that is what a Native American looks like. That is what an Indigenous person looks like. And when we don't fit that part, we don't even allow ourselves to be that unless we look like that, because that is the symbol, that is the imagery that we're trying to portray ourselves when we're growing up as a youth. So it does violence against us, and it just definitely demeans us. It gives fans, like these fans, well, I don't know if they're fans, but fans an excuse to dress up and mimic us and basically make fun of us. And again, because I grew up in an LDS background, this would be the same thing as myself going out and wearing garments, just straight up wearing garments, the Holy Temple garments, and just thinking it's cool, thinking it's okay. Or a Muslim person, wearing what a Muslim person wears. It's like, it's not okay, because what we wear is sacred.
Yeah, it's and again, it goes back to the tactics of like making somebody's culture less than, and attacking their culture, appropriating their culture. And this is definitely not honoring us in whatsoever. I don't know where that happened, or I don't know what ridiculous conversation had happened that folks would think that this is a way of honoring us. This is definitely not. Even like this whole like Chief whatever, Yahoo or whatever, the red skin, like that's perpetuating those stereotypes that all natives have red skin, or darker skin. And so it's harmful to the Indigenous community, because you have Indigenous people who are mixed blood, who are not 100% Indigenous or whatever, but then for whatever reason, they think that they need to be dark skinned. And then vice versa with the natives who are 100% Indigenous, they think they need to be, so it really confuses our young people on identity. And so this is not good practice. And I'm glad that a lot of movements have been happening. I know teams are doing the best that they can to kind of change things, or how they what's the word that I'm looking for, how they approach tribes and how they work with tribes, which I think is really good. I think that's one step towards reconciliation, but another step would be to shift things around and let the Indigenous people design their logo and how they want to be portrayed. And that would be huge. But for whatever reason, rich white guys hate that shit. They fucking hate it when Indigenous people get to decide on how they want to be portrayed. They hate that shit. They hate us because we're standing up and saying no more. And so they just have to like keep oppressing because that's not their way. Because it's not their way, they just need to fucking push their ways on their values on us. And it's, you know, historically pushing their values on us has been the greatest outcome, right? No, that's fucking wrong.
Yeah.
Anyways,
All right, I have two questions. One for you, Jacob, and one for you, Carl.
Yeah.
Is it for you, Jacob? Is it ever okay to dress up as an Indigenous person? And then for you, Carl, you brought this up. What is the difference between dressing up as a Native American versus a Viking, a leprechaun, or a Mexican?
it is never okay to dress up as an Indigenous person ever. I think the only thing that you'll ever get close to that is if you're blanketed in a ceremony and they actually put the blanket on you, or if you're gifted a headdress through doing an honorable thing or having these reconciliation conversations, you do something honorable, they give you a feather hat, which is also known as the headdress or the war bonnet or whatever. The feather hat, like that was a political thing that happened when they would gift non-native people these war bonnets. And to wear the war bonnet means that you're entering into contract, a sacred contract, that you have to uphold that relationship to that community forever. There's no ending the contract after 3 years, after 2 years. Oh, my Verizon wireless bill just ended. I can say F you to those guys. No, it was forever. And so when you take on that blanket, you take on that feather hat, that is a sacred thing that you're entering into. And there can be no less than. Go ahead, Carl.
You might have to get me back on track here, Janessa, but I want to speak to what Jacob's talking about, because if you look at this image right here, you have this kid holding a chanupa. This is a sacred pipe. That right there is so very, very, very sacred. And that sacred, the smoking of that pipe does what Jacob says, is it does things in truth, and it binds it in honor, you know, and that smoke goes up and it goes to the creator, and it's a what do you call it? It's a contract between you, the person, and God, the creator themselves. Okay, but back to what your question was. So I believe in everybody's, I believe in the sovereignty of culture, the sovereignty of ethnicities, the sovereignty of nationalities. And I don't know, I get hit with these things all the time, right? Like, oh, well, you don't see us Irish people complaining about St. Patrick's Day, or you don't complain about, or Irish people don't complain about Notre Dame, you know, you don't, you know, or Vikings and whatever, you know. It's like, that's not my place. Oh, I don't know what, you know, like I have nothing to say about those because it's not my place. I'm not them. I can't say what's sacred and what's not sacred. What I can say definitively is that the indigenous outfits, or the indigenous clothes that we wear, the feathers that we wear, the ceremonies that we do, those are sacred, and they're not for anybody else to be mocking or doing. So it really doesn't matter what they think, or if they like it or whatever. That's fine. That's not for me. Oh, and I do want to say something about the Bountiful Braves, because both my organizations, Jacobs and my, are SLCR protectors and Pandos, were people who signed on to petition to get rid of the Bountiful Braves. And I think it's his name, Principal Aaron Hogue, for doing the honorable thing and getting rid of that mascot, because that was hard to get rid of. And it was hard to get rid of because of people's sentiments, their sentimental tie to that, you know, these old brave alumni people who are like, oh, I was a brave, I want my kids, my grandchildren to be braves, and they're just taking this away from us. Well, guess what? That's exactly what you did to us as a people, as a culture. You took away our culture, you know. And if anybody's sovereignty, or if anybody should be listened to, it's the Indigenous people. And yeah, they had some people who got some Indigenous group, the Guardians of, I can't remember who they're called, the Guardians of Native America, whatever. They're also people who were trying to keep the Cedar City Reds, I think it was the Cedar City Redskins, from changing their name. But honestly, they're uneducated about the violence that this does. It absolutely does violence. There's been reports of, like, psychological reports, like studies have been done that this is wrong, or it does psychological damage. And then the morality of it, I mean, I don't see how hard it is to understand that it's immoral to somebody else's, or to pretend to be somebody else's sacred.
It's just such a vicious cycle, because it's like, take our culture away, tell us not to be like this, but then put these cultural representations in our face and fight to keep it, but we can't do it. And I can't imagine, I mean, I can, similarly with the Black community, we're always seeing these misconceptions of our culture too, and we try to take part in it, then we're told we can't, and it is very traumatic. And it just like misses mainstream society, because they're so removed from it that they don't even think about the effect that this actually has on our minds.
All right, so I think that there's definitely there's a similarity between the way that Europeans treat humans and the way that, or sorry, like the Western mindset treats humans is the same way that Western mindset treats land, or the minerals, or natural resources. It's the same thing. Like, whereas Indigenous people, we're looking at everything as having a sacred quality, and we think of land as being sacred. I mean, it's just as, land is just as sacred as a mosque, is just as sacred as a temple, as just as sacred as a church building, a cathedral. Like, those are the same to us, and the way that we treat those things is in a way where we've been taught, you know, by the creator, by whatever, and divinity, that we have a mandate, we have a responsibility to take care of the climate. Well, I don't even think we even considered the climate. We considered it wasn't in that perspective. It was in the perspective that you take care of animals, you take care of plants, you take care of each other. And when you do those things, then that whole climate, that is taken care of. You know, I don't think that we even had an understanding of climate change and the way that we affect climate. Our focus was on taking care of each other. And, you know, you're seeing here, you know, a majority of the fights are on Indigenous land and led by Indigenous people. Like, these fights are Indigenous led, and it takes everyone to come behind those Indigenous people, because it's the Indigenous people of these certain lands that have that responsibility to take care of it.
Yeah, and there's been, even in those, you know, climate change groups, climate activist groups, there's been some colonialized practices happening, where it's a pyramid, and for whatever reason, the little white girl gets to stand on top of it and decide this is what we're doing, when Indigenous people have been protecting sacred sites, land, since before 1492. Okay, let's just be real. They're the ones that are getting locked up, you know, maced, sprayed at, you know, water during a winter. You know, we're the ones that are on the front lines getting, basically, we're going missing. Okay, it's not little white girls, it's Indigenous people that are going missing for protecting everybody. And I think a lot has to do with practicing stewardship of the land and understanding that Indigenous people had a connection with the land. They had a connection with the animals. I mean, we talk to our animals right now. Like, we tell them to go to the bathroom, we tell them to go for a walk, or we tell them, you know, you talk to your animal, right? I feel like back then, our connection to the animals was magnified by like 100%. And we could actually have conversations with the animals, with the trees, with the land, and we understood how to take care of the land. Controlled burns so that we could let life grow again. There was a thing called, you know, controlled burns, you know, just having that deeper connection. And nowadays, people are like, holy crap, nature-based solutions. Yeah, nature-based solutions, and they coin it. But in reality, that's just Indigenous practices. And they're ripping off Indigenous people yet again for their own benefit. And that's what's happening. That's what I'm going to talk about at the UN, UNFCCC, also known as COP26, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, where all the world leaders are going to come together and they're going to talk about nature-based solutions. And there's a lot of greenwashing that happens. They start talking about these solutions, but in fact, these are false solutions that exclude Indigenous people. When, how can you exclude a people when 99.9% of the time they're the ones fighting and getting thrown into prison? You know, and of course their allies come in, and we appreciate allies. We appreciate allies coming in and helping, but just make sure it doesn't turn into a pyramid, because there's a lot of Indigenous people who are brainwashed to think that they're lesser than. And so, and white people go to the top because these people have been brainwashed. Okay. So understand how to be an ally. Don't go in to extract from those groups of people. If you want to help the Indigenous people, stand on your shoulders, not the other way around. So anyways, going back to this, you know, sorry, I know I kind of got a little bit preachy there, but it's the truth. That's what happens. People have been doing that to Indigenous people throughout history. And doTERRA, you know, those oils, yeah, they ripped that shit off from Indigenous people. Even penicillin, they ripped that shit off from Indigenous people. Like, there's so many things that get ripped off from Indigenous people, and they get coined by, like, you know, the settlers. And then the settlers, they have that community that supports them, and then they end up making billions of dollars, and then they wonder why there's poverty on Indigenous communities, right? So anyways, go ahead, Carl, you can take over.
No, I think I can leave it at that.
Yeah, I do have a question. What would an Indigenous-centered climate change movement look like in comparison?
Standing Rock, Standing Rock, Line 3, Bears Ears Coalition, down Central America, you have, you know, like Amazonian people just standing up, people in Peru, people, I'm sorry, like, what does it look like, or where are they?
I think in terms of, like, in comparison to like the United Nations and this greenwashing, if Indigenous ways of being are centered, what does that climate change movement look like compared to what we see?
It looks like action. It looks like action, just like Jacob said. It looks like direct action. It looks like actually doing something and not saying something. It's locking yourself down. It is dying for the cause. Like, that is what it is. It's about doing it, not just talking about it.
Yeah, and I think it has to be ingrained in Indigenous knowledge and led by Indigenous people at the front, not the side, not the back, at the front. Because once you start having these like climate, that's the thing about climate change, is these movements, is it loses its like authenticity when it's not involving Indigenous people, because you can't ignore us. We've been there since the beginning. We're the OGs of Indigenous climate change movements, climate action. We're there. We've been there. It's not 15-year-old girls from Europe. It's not, you know, these people doing that. No, we've been there. We're the ones that deserve the credit because we're the ones that are being affected and impacted by climate change at the forefront. There's villages that are getting washed away in northern Canada because of climate change. Like Indigenous lands are at the forefront of all this. Bears Ears, Standing Rock, Line 3, and the list is like 2 miles long. Even here in the valley in Utah County, this was all Ute land, and it got taken over by the Mormon settlers. They came in, climate, whatever, genocide, and they raped, they pillaged, they extracted everything they could from the land because they don't understand what respect is, and they never will, because it's hard for them to understand that. So anyways.
Do you want to start on this, Jacob?
Yeah, so there's a make-believe land, the last 200 years in the valley where the Mormons were here, and they broke bread, and they had Thanksgiving with the natives, and everything was peachy keen. No, it was chemical warfare, smallpox, polar, whatever, everything they could put out into the Indigenous community. That's what happened. Stole the land, raped the land, extracted natural resources from the land for white people to benefit here in the valley. And that's what happened. There's no, we worked together, fought together. No, it wasn't like that at all. That's the history that they wanted you to believe. No, they totally screwed everybody over. That's the history. And we're literally living on stolen land. I'm living on stolen land. And I have to live with that every day. So how do you make things right? How do you justify that? How do you reconcile that? Well, you volunteer with Indigenous people, their organizations, give to tribes, outsource from Indigenous people, support them, share your resources with them, understand that these organizations are going to take a lot of work. So just be here to listen, to help, to take action, stand by us on the front lines, let us lead. Don't put yourself in this weird hierarchy of, colonization where I'm uplifting, but from the front. No, you're pushing us up from the back. Go ahead, Carl.
So there was just a question talking about Zion. Zion is from the LDS culture. It's not from the Indigenous culture. So Utah's culture, I like to look at it. Not like that I like it, but I liken it to colonialism, like hyper-colonialism. Colonialism is a system of hierarchy and patriarchy and a Christianity that's based in Roman Catholicism. All of those things are hyper and they're hyper in the LDS culture, which is Utah's culture after, when the Mormons, Brigham Young came, all of this stuff came. And I'm talking about this is a matter of fact. This isn't because I left it and I'm trying to get back at the church. This is just the matter of fact is that hierarchy is built in now. And that hierarchy comes in color. We saw that. We see this in the church where there are white people and then there are brown people, Lamanites, who can attain a certain level of whiteness, who can have that salvation. And then there's black people, and which originally had no future of salvation until all the sons of Adam had the chance to become endowed. But anyway, so you have this hierarchy of people groups, and when they came into Zion and they claimed, and Brigham Young says, this is the right place, that is so arrogant to say when it was somebody else's place. It wasn't their place. In fact, at that time, it was Mexico. And then we have the hypocrisy of borders, of people the Utah culture that has kind of bled into the Arizona culture, Mesa, Cameron, that area, they have this hard time with borders, and it's just hypocritical because, you know, they came as refugees, crossed the border illegally, took over other people's lands. Okay, so we have this hierarchy, we have patriarchy. Patriarchy is so embedded and ingrained into colonial thought that it's men in charge, men, you know, and get to the Constitution and everything like that. Those were all men. Those were all men that did that. And so what comes out of that Constitution, what comes out of that culture, all favors men, just naturally. Doesn't even have to be intentionally, but it favors men. So we have men, we have patriarchy, we have hierarchy, and well, and then we have salvation. I mean, just a particular way to get to salvation, which again, you know, the United States tried to do to us, where they would take us and they would send our children away to residential schools to try and kill the Indian, save the man. I mean, my tribe, Hopi people, we actually had people go to Alcatraz. We were sent, our parents were sent to Alcatraz because they didn't want to give up their children. We were actually sent, just think about it. How would you feel if your parents or you yourself were sent to jail, to a prison, because you didn't want to let your kids go by force to another place so that their culture could be erased and another culture instilled in them? So when they came back, you can't even talk. You can't even relate to each other. Just let that set in. And Utah it's been a part of this. It has taken a place. It has been a part of this with the Indian placement program. Anyway, I'll stop there.
And I just want to do something too, is the LDS Church does not trust the Indigenous tribes. They don't trust Indigenous people. I know they don't. And this is a perfect example. This is no knock on American Indian Services, AIS, but they have the first Native American executive director that just got appointed recently, like within the last month. And it is the longest scholarship giving Native organization in the country, the longest standing. So for like 30, 40 years. And now they have an ED that's Native after all these years. And they wonder why there's poverty on Native tribes, is because they do that. They start these nonprofits and the ED's white. And of course he gets paid what he gets paid. People, they say Dale Tingey is a great person. I just feel like that guy just made his entire career getting rich off of Native people. He stood on all shoulders, and we let him because we're brainwashed to let them do that. And I hate it. I fucking hate that. And I will call out Indigenous led organizations that are being led by white people. I will call them out from now on. I will not sit back and just let it happen. You can't call yourself Indigenous led or an Indigenous organization if you are practicing those harmful practices of extracting from the children that are on the reservation, trying to give them brighter futures. And that's what they perpetuate. No knock on AAS.
Yeah.
No knock on them. I'm really happy that Chama Jansen is the new executive director. Go help them out. You want to go? I never promoted them before. I will promote them now because Chama's there and her husband is Dustin Jansen, who is the director of Indian Affairs. Good people, there for the right reasons. I'm glad they are changing the way things are in the Valley. Go support them.
I agree. Go support them. They're awesome people. And again, I mean, talking about educated people, those are educated people right there. I mean, the director of Indian Affairs, you know, was an attorney for the Navajo Nation, you know, so I mean, right there. Somebody had a question about patriarchy, and I want to make this clear is that patriarchy and matriarchy in and of themselves aren't like the system or the right system or toxic. But what we've seen in the Western mindset is patriarchy is very toxic. there are patriarchies in indigenous land. There are matriarchies and patriarchies, but one of the things is that there is always a balance. There's always a balance, even in patriarchies, like the Sioux people, the Lakota people, they would be considered a patriarchy, but the women are like the ones who like really make the decisions. And so there's a complementary component to those, just the same as in matriarchies. There's a complementary system. It's not toxic. It's not somebody's over somebody else. It's just the roles that they take. So there's a difference between the indigenous practice of patriarchy and matriarchy, as opposed to the colonial way of patriarchy, which is very, very toxic and very demeaning.
Yeah, and just one final comment on that. Going back to the whole like indigenous patriarchy, indigenous matriarchy, like those are a little bit different. Same thing goes for the feminist movement that's happening. I do support that, but the indigenous feminism movement is a little different. It is a little different, and it's being led and distinguished by indigenous people, indigenous women. And that's where it should be. And so just to kind of drop that in there.
Q&A is at the end, just so everyone knows. We are going to get to all of your questions. We have 2 more slides. I'm going to have us pop back to MMIW because we skipped this slide accidentally. Have you talk about this? All the talk of matriarchy and patriarchy, if it's in right here.
Yeah. So y'all really need to follow both organizations, pandos.org and slcfprotectors.org. Pandos has, I would say, the largest group that deals with missing and murdered Indigenous women in Utah. It's MMIW plus Utah. We're Indigenous woman led. It's always been Indigenous. It's about education and about it's about educating and also about compassion, the compassion component of families being supported who need to be supported. Missing and murdered Indigenous women, it's an epidemic that came with colonialism, that came with patriarchy, that came with the hierarchy. At the top, in a Western mindset, it's a white male, a white Christian male, and then it goes down from there. It'd be a person of color, and then it would be a woman, and then people of color. And so when you have women of color, they're at the very bottom. And actually at the very bottom would be transgender people. So our transgender people are the highest risk of any kind of violence across the board when it comes to the most, what do you call that? I mean, the highest impact, the most vulnerable community for us is our transgender, our two-spirit people, youth especially, either from suicide or just from violence or from human trafficking, those situations. Anyway, MMIW, Utah's not doing a good job at documenting Indigenous people. They don't have a database that's right. They don't care to categorize, which is something that a lot of people don't understand. It is very important to categorize, because if we don't categorize, then we don't know what is happening to certain people. And when it comes to Indigenous people, if they don't have an Indigenous last name, if they have a last name like Martinez or Moore, they're going to be categorized as something else, right? Whereas us as Indigenous people, we can have whatever, like my last name is Moore. That last name was given to us, a family name from boarding school, where our name changed from Talawaitiwa to Moore, or a person who is intermarried into a Latinx family, Martinez or Dominguez or something like that. We get miscategorized. Anyway, just to really quickly talk about this, it is something that is, if you want, you want to learn more about it, watch, Wind River. Watch Wind River. It really helped get this movement going to make people aware. But yeah, Wind River.
Thank you so much. We're gonna
If you want, if you want to be a part of it, again, go to pandos.org and there'll be another link for that subcommittee. And you're very much welcome to join anything that we do. All right, Jacob, you want to talk about spirituality first?
Yeah. So spirituality is, oh my gosh, this is something that, how do I say this? We want the world to be indigenous. We do, but on our terms and not your terms, if that makes sense. We want to promote indigenous practices. We do. We want to, but there's a fine line that happens when people take indigenous spirituality and then they start selling it. It's capitalism 101, and that leads into colonization 101 of taking someone's culture and selling it basically for profit. And then again, I asked this question again, and you wonder why there's poverty on the reservations, because people extract. Like, indigenous people have been extracted from for so long that we don't even know when we're being extracted from, if that makes sense, because it becomes oh, share your culture with me, share your ways with me, and then I'm going to take that and run with it. And that's not cool anymore. That's not cool. Like, if I'm sharing something with you, if I share with you, hey, this is how you're supposed to use smudge or sage, this is how you're supposed to use that in a way that is respectful and authentic, where you bless yourself, 4 times or whatever it may be, or if you put some tobacco in your shoes for protection, that's me sharing that with you. That's not so that you can take that and share it with 10,000 other people. Like, something that kind of hurt me the other day was I stopped at a gas station to get some gas, and I saw sage being sold on the shelf. Like, that's our medicines. How can somebody do that? Just literally take something that is very spiritual to Native people and then coin it and then use it. And if it continues to do that, people will stop thinking, oh, it didn't come from indigenous people. It just came from this like new age movement that's cool and hip. When in reality, that was indigenous people's way of cleansing themselves before they go into ceremony. Like, I don't know. There's a lot I can say about that. But again, if you are going to source, you're going to harvest sweetgrass, sage, cedar, whatever it may be, make sure you're getting it from the source, and make sure that you're not selling it. Like, don't do that. Like, you can share knowledge, but make sure that the story goes with it, and that you're not like, there's a difference between one person and like 10,000 people. Like, you gotta keep it sacred, otherwise it loses its meaning. And so that's kind of my my take on spirituality. Is even powwow, Zumba, like, if that becomes a thing, and then all of a sudden we have white people teaching our indigenous dances as a way to stay in shape, like, that's just somebody else coining us again and making profits off of us. And then we ask ourselves, why is there poverty still in the United States? Well, this is why. It's because we've been extracted from so much that we don't even know anymore. So anyways, go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, I'd be very cautious of people giving ceremonies and actually like selling ceremony. Like, as in, like, if you're going to go to a sweat lodge, you're going to go to an inipi, if people are charging you to go into it, then I would say, well, that's wrong. There's something wrong there if you're being charged for it. I like the gifting of sage, the gifting of tobacco, the gifting of cedar. If you gifted it, then it's good. It's very good. If you are going to buy it, you gotta, I don't know. that's really, really tricky. I mean, I'll rest on what Jacob has said about that, but
Don't do it.
yeah, I mean, I also want to acknowledge something that everyone is indigenous to somewhere. Like there's it's just that a lot of people have lost their indigeneity. They don't know, they're so freaking lost. And that's why we have this big movement right now. This neo-shamanistic movement is people are really connecting with Turtle Island indigeneity. They're really connecting. And there's a reason why. I think it's because it is so organic. It is so at its core, it's real. It is very real because it's connecting with the earth, is connecting with the animals, is connecting with the plants. And so I would encourage everyone to find out what your indigeneity is, find out where that's from, figure out what those ceremonies are, because I can guarantee you that those ceremonies that your indigenous people are connected with will connect to you better because they have that context. You have a better context of where that's coming from and where that's going. So just be careful of neo-shamans, people charging you for medicine, people charging you for ceremony. Like ceremony should never, ever, ever be sold. I mean, medicine people are the poorest people. All of our medicine people, they're poor because they don't, that's all they do is they give, and they live off of donations, and they don't charge. They don't charge. Like it's very respectful. If you're gonna get medicine from somebody, if you are gonna do ceremony, yeah, it's appropriate to give, but they're never gonna ask for that. You give food, you give blankets, you give whatever, that you feel is appropriate, that measures, whatever it is that they're gifting you.
And just to play off that really quickly, like it's a give. If somebody's going to come doctor me, if I'm sick and somebody's going to come doctor me, I'm going to make sure that there's a Pendleton blanket there ready for them with tobacco. And like the value of a Pendleton blanket is $200+. So like, that's how we trade. Like that's our form of currency, as well as we trade, we barter, we give from our hearts. And what Carl says is true when he says that, like, medicine people will, number one, they never will claim that they're a medicine man or a medicine woman or a medicine individual, but they do have those types of talents and gifts from the creator where they can heal people. And some people, they say they're healers, but again, a healer will never ever say that they're a healer. They'll just go out and do it. And your job as the person who's getting doctored is to, thank them in some kind of way, whether it's one cigarette or 10 blankets from 7th gen. Sorry, not Pendleton. My bad, not Pendleton, 7th generation. Those guys are the real deal. Pendleton, again, that's a whole nother mess where
Appropriation
101, those guys totally ripped off indigenous design for their benefit, and they've been benefiting from indigenous people for years. And so 7th generation now is the place to source from for your blankets, and that's where I source from now. So anyways,
So appropriated that now you're saying Pendleton. Would you look at that? Became a part.
Yeah, again, it's that us as a people, we've been colonized ourselves. We didn't understand what's going on, but with education, comes responsibility. Just like Spider-Man, with great powers comes a lot of responsibility. We know better now.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know it's not easy to just sit here and promote your trauma and harm to the world. So I want you to know how truly grateful I am for the time you've committed to educate us. We're now going to turn the time over to you, audience members. We've been seeing some great questions flowing in. So Rebecca has been keeping a big list of all the questions together. I'm going to turn it to you to point out some of the best ones.
Yeah, so great questions came through. Thank you, Carl and Jacob, so much. So kind of been keeping track, some we talked about during the conversation, some we haven't touched on. So kind of as a follow-up to this conversation about buying goods, when it comes to going onto the reservation or, sourcing from folks on the reservation, what does that look like? Is there a way that people can, like, where would be the entry point for people to do that? And kind of what are some of the rules or things people should keep in mind when trying to buy from reservations and folks on the reservations?
Yeah, let me take this one. I would just say to if you're traveling through, check and see your route. Like reservations are everywhere in the United States. They're everywhere. Check and see your route. You're going on a trip. What are the reservations that you're going to pass through on your journey? And then stop at the gas station, fill up your tank there. You're bringing value to the reservation. Get your food from people that are selling food on the side of the road or jewelry on the side of the road. And usually that will be on the border. So like, for instance, if I'm traveling to the Four Corners because I want to take some photos and, go down to the Grand Canyon, there are Navajo towns along the way, like Montezuma Creek, even near Bluff, where people congregate and they have like their little shop set up on the side of the roads. As soon as you see that, stop and just buy your whole Christmas list right there. Just get it done. And you're bringing that value to the reservation again. And make sure you wear a mask, especially if you're traveling through those indigenous communities, because COVID's a real thing. And so again, check your route, see what reservation is there. Some of the reservations are more progressive, where they have hotels and casinos. Stay the night there. If you like to gamble, gamble a little bit there. Eat their food, try their cuisine. If there's clothing, jackets, shirts, buy something from the gift shop. But I would actually say to buy it from like the actual person. And so just ask questions, and that's how you can do it. Go ahead, Carl.
That's good. Good job, bro.
That's
Perfect.
great to hear, because I've actually heard people like wondering if it's culturally offensive to stop at the reservation, because then they're like, oh, let's go visit this reservation, like watch the people. So I guess it depends, like the state of mind you have going into that environment as well, that you generally want to support and put the money where it's supposed to go, but you're not just going to be like a spectator of this like foreign environment.
Yeah, and
Yeah, let me.
sorry, let me drop this real quick, Carl. Something too is it's almost tax season, where you got to start doing like the end of the year tax donations. Native American or nonprofit organizations, drop your money there. Tax write-off, drop your money there, because that money, it goes to support and build capacity within those Native nonprofits. Please do that. We don't, the Red Cross doesn't need your money. Okay, SLC Hair Protectors, Pandos, and Utah D.I.V.A, AIS, Adopt a Native Elder. Well, I don't know about those guys. I don't know about Adopt a Native Elder. I don't know who their ED is. I don't know if it's white. It's probably a white guy. Never mind those guys. But do give to the organizations that are doing the work. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, don't try to whatever you call. Don't drop their prices down. Whatever you call that. Whatever you want to call it. Just pay what it is. Pay more. Give them tips. Do whatever, I mean, these people work so hard. I mean, this is handcrafted stuff, I mean, when they get down to it, I bet you they're probably making like $5 an hour, so pay them what they want.
Okay, moving to another question. About land acknowledgements. So we're speaking of bare minimum territory, but when and where should people do land acknowledgements, or should they be doing them, or what is kind of, where should people's minds be at with that conversation and that action?
If you're LDS, during your fast and testimony session, whatever, during church, for sure, that will really piss off the Mormons. You should also do it at conferences, in class presentations. Anytime you're doing a speaking engagement, you should always incorporate a land acknowledgement, bare minimum thing that you do, and find out where you are. And if you want to be really cool on your Instagram, social media, you know, that little description thing, put up that land acknowledgement, find out where you are so that you can practice being a good relative to Indigenous people. What do you think, Carl?
Yeah, I just anywhere where they do some kind of an opening, any meeting, land acknowledgement is very important. It's especially important if for woke communities, any kind of a rally, any kind of something like that, any kind of a march, you have to do a land acknowledgement, and preferably by an Indigenous person, but bare minimum, just acknowledge, say, hey, we just want to acknowledge that we're on stolen land. And I think one really good point that Jacob made was Jacob's on stolen land, I'm on stolen land. Where our people come from aren't from Utah. Okay, so we have to abide by the people whose stewardship is here. Ute, Shoshone, Goshute people here. We're on stolen land ourselves. So we're, like there's over 570 recognized tribes in the United States. And there was a map, I think Rebecca, there's a map and a link of like whose land you are on. Everywhere you're on stolen land, unless you're Indigenous to that place, which is very few.
What about like when going on hikes or like going out in the nature? Would that be a good common practice to do?
You can do that if you want. If you're talking with your partner or friends, just be like, hey, we're on the traditional lands of the Paiute, Ute, Northern Ute, Goshute, Navajo, ancestral Pueblos. That's who used to be here, in conversation. And whatever you do not mark up, the land. Don't do that. Don't write your name, sketch your name into like the rocks. Like, that's not cool. So if you've done it before in the past, it's okay. You're forgiven now, but don't do it again in the future. You've been warned.
Yeah, land acknowledgement comes with actually, respecting the land, respecting people. It isn't something that you should just only say. It's about the doing of it. It's about the doing. If you say you're on stolen land, then know whose land you're on and see what kind of struggles they're going through. MMIW is always going to be a struggle for everybody. Diabetes is probably going to be a struggle. Certain land fights, battles with the state, with the federal government, those are going to be problems. Mascots are going to be a problem. Really fast, let me talk about mascots, because we do have some unique circumstances where we have the Seminole tribe has partnered with Florida State to allow them to use the Seminole as their mascot, and the Utah Utes, the University of Utah Utes has a special relationship with the Northern Ute tribe, and so I'm all about sovereignty of tribes and what they allow, even though I don't like it. I can't really criticize them because they've made deals with the university. So just to kind of go back on that, just for education purposes.
Yeah, and again, there's a give and take there. They use the name, the logo. They also offer scholarships, things for the tribe within itself. And so there's a give and take there. And the school and the tribe have worked out what that looks like. And so in the future, when you're all are millionaires and you want to own a team, make sure that you're, working out that relationship, with us. The Calgary Flames, they come and they work out on my tribe. They use our gym, our facilities. And so the young people get to see them and they get to get autographs. Sometimes they'll do season tickets, they'll do stuff, give and take, work opportunities, whatever that may look like. they do that a lot back home where I'm from. And so I'm assuming it's similar to the Utes. So
There was a question off of Mascots in the chat about the history of lacrosse. Is that anything that either of you two could speak on, and kind of the history of the game and what that looks like in that sport?
that's an indigenous sport. And it's kind of a shame what happened I don't know if it was a couple of years ago when it happened, but these guys created the Haudenosaunee and the Six Nations, Mohawk, that group of tribes created lacrosse, and it means something more. And again, I don't know what that looked like, what that is, but they created the game, and several years ago they were actually banned from playing in the international finals, world champions. I can't remember what it was, and I think it was the Irish. I don't know if it was the Scottish or Irish, but they actually bowed out to give them their spot, and then they fought, and then I think they won. But it was that group that they were the ones who created lacrosse, the game lacrosse. There's other games too. I've been hearing things about basketball. I've been hearing things about hockey, all kinds of weird things going on about where the origins of these sports came from. And so even running, the running community, like our prayer runners, we run because of this, because of that, that was something else too. So there's a lot of things that kind of happened to our sports. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, there's so many different tribes and stuff like that. I definitely acknowledge that lacrosse was by the Iroquois people. I think the situation was actually that they wouldn't allow them to use their tribal passports. They couldn't use their passports, weren't allowed. It was actually the United States that wouldn't allow them to use their own passports, which is a problem we have with sovereignty. It's a so-called sovereignty. It's not real sovereignty. We talk about, originally the United States made treaties with us because we were sovereign nations. You can't make a treaty with your own self. There's no reason to make a treaty with yourself, but they did make treaties with peoples. And these treaties have been violated. Every single one of these treaties has been violated. But anyway, but the point is that we should be sovereign, but we're not. We're plenary to the state, where we have to follow the same a certain core federal rules as the United States makes us. But anyway, I don't know how that really comes into play with lacrosse. I know that you should respect the game, and especially respect the people who made the game, because that's a sacred game. I mean, it's more than a game. It's a sacred ceremony.
We had a couple of questions talking about bloodlines. So for example, there was one in Blood Quantum. So there was one, asking, how do you feel about people that discover indigenous ancestry that was lost due to colonialization or slavery? And then one about, white people who claim indigenous identity because they have a small percentage in their blood family line, and how they feel as a white person trying to navigate that situation. Should they kind of affirm that or deny it, and navigating those types of conversations?
Well,
go ahead, Carl.
Go ahead.
Okay, all right.
You go, Jacob.
I think if you have ancestry of indigenous heritage or bloodlines, I think that's really cool. And I think a good way to be an ally and to honor those roots is to show up for the people, give to the communities, and find out where that ancestry comes from. Now, is it the same as somebody today who is 50, 25%, 100% indigenous? Are you on the same level? I don't know. But I do think that this person who has lost their line quote unquote, I do think that they need to reconnect, and it's these folks' job to help open that door. Now, are these folks entitled to certain benefits that these folks have? No, I don't think they're entitled to that at all. There has been situations where people have claimed to have Indigenous ancestry, and they get all these funding and scholarship opportunities to get movies made about Indigenous people. And all of a sudden we find out that, you know, their ancestry actually isn't real. It was made up somewhere. And so that's, you have to walk a fine line with those folks. But I do think that we should not bar those folks. But there are certain things that these people have that these people don't have, and that these people can still give, and these people can still give as well. And so that's my take on that. Blood quantum is a slippery slope, because it was created to really check the Indigenous populations as a way to get rid of eventually. And that, again, is another tactic that the United States, Canadian government pushed on Indigenous people as a way to get rid of us eventually. And it really kind of pulls us back. And so we as Indigenous people, we need to redefine what that looks like. And is it going to be, you know, if you can prove your lineage that you are full-blooded Indigenous, or, you know, are we going to keep doing this blood quantum game? And I know that kind of sounds contradictory to what I just said before, but that's why we need to take a look at it and revisit it as tribal governments, as Indigenous communities. We need to define on what that looks like. And if that's so, and if the individual, if we change and that individual can prove their line, then let's bring them into the tribe. Let's do it. Let's do that. Let's share our resources. Let's make ourselves better. Let's, you know, add on to the collective, you know, but just remember, there are people who pretend to be Indigenous that make up tribes to access certain benefits that may exist out there, that try to establish a quote unquote tribe that got erased. And they go and they do that as a way to, you know, build a casino, and there's like 10 of them. You know, that happens a lot. I've seen that happen before, but it doesn't happen a lot, but I do see people pretending to be Indigenous. That does happen at times. You know, they're 199th Indigenous, and they're the ones that are leading the ceremony and trying to tell people how to be Indigenous, which I'm just like, what the heck? That just happened to me. I threw a powwow a couple of months ago, and somebody was trying to tell me how to run my powwow, and I'm like, buddy, do you know who I am? Like, I grew up in this circle. This is why I'm doing this for the community. Like, don't tell me how to run this ceremony. Like, don't do that. And the guy happened to be like this much, and it was just too much for me to handle. So anyways.
So there's the purpose. Like, what is the purpose to claim it? I want to make something clear is there are people who are very clearly Indigenous. Like, they present as Indigenous, they present as non-white. And when you present as that, there are discriminations that come along with that. So someone, if they just barely found out that they're part this or part that, I'm pretty sure that they're probably presenting as white. They're probably presenting as the majority class, or the class that has the political efficacy. So for them to start claiming indigeneity or whatever, basically they're trying to get the best of both worlds, right? Like, they're trying to get the best of whatever their tribe affords them, as far as like help, and also living in this white world where it's already built for white people, right? So it's like, what is the purpose? Why is it? If you haven't had to struggle like Indigenous people who present as Indigenous, you know, then don't try to assume that you know what the struggle is. Don't say, well, I know what it's like to be prejudiced to have prejudice against me because I'm Native American, or they probably won't say Native American, they'll probably say Indian, right? I'm an Indian too, you know, so I know what you feel like. Well, no, you don't, because presenting in one way isn't the same as presenting in another. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, just real quick, I think there's several things happening too. Like, a lot of my friends are half breeds, quote unquote half breed, whatever, half something something, and what they're finding is they're reconnecting to their culture now in their 20s, and they basically grew up away from the culture, and so now they're trying to come back into the culture, and they're feeling this oppression from the Native community. And it's almost like, how do I say this? Like, I'm not saying we're doing ourselves a disservice by doing that, but I feel like that needs to be revisited, and we need to be more welcoming to these people, to bring them into the collective so that we can make our community stronger. And what does that look like? I don't know, but I have been told by several folks who, my friends are half white, or they'll be half Native, whatever, half Mexican, half Black, whatever. They'll say that to me. They'll say, how do we reconnect? And I said, well, it's a journey. It's not just one day you're in the club. Like, it doesn't work like that. Like, it can take years. It can take a long time to get to where you want to be. And it's just not just it's not a only full-blooded natives get into the club. Like, again, Indigenous people are super giving of I mean, we gave our land, literally. You know, it's just, how does that look like, and what does that look like? And I always say this: if you're struggling with identity, or if you're trying to reconnect with who you are as an Indigenous person, the best thing to do is go back to your people, learn how to pray, learn how to sing, learn how to dance, or learn how to pray. That's it, the bare minimum, so that you can, or just introduce yourself in your native language so that you can do that, and that you will adopt that. And it takes a lot of time. Like, it's a journey. We're all on this journey of reclaiming our power, because we're all suffering from colonization. Even me. I mean, even I'm speaking English now. I'm not speaking Tsuut'ina. I'm speaking English because I'm suffering from colonization. And so it's a journey, but I'm learning my language now. In my 30s, I'm learning my language. I've learned my dances, I've learned my songs, I've learned how to pray within my own Tsuut'ina language, and I'm just trying to learn my language now. So you just have to open the door and understand this is how it's going to be. And you can't just do it because of politically it's cool now, quote unquote, to be Indigenous. You have to be sincere about it. You have to stick around. Like, you can't just take the good things about the culture and then leave and go back to your world. Like, it doesn't work like that. You have to be with the people, to learn from the people, to have those experiences, and to also reconnect that connection, that sacred connection that we have to the land, to ourselves. I mean, my braid, like, this is my connection to the you know, the earth. Avatar totally fucking ripped, Disney or whoever made Avatar totally ripped all that from Indigenous people. You know, they totally ripped it, but that's the connection that we have with our spirits, with our people. So anyway.
Yeah, this actually, I mean, you kind of almost indirectly answered one of our audience members' questions about learning Indigenous languages and ways of communication being reinforced inside Indigenous communities, and, you know, what are the efforts to keep the traditions alive? So is there anything that either of you just want to add on to that topic?
No, that goes along with what I was saying. Is, you know, our parents' generation, grandparents' generation was taught to not speak the language, and that's why I don't speak the languages, because my dad never got taught the language. So it's been lost in my direct family line. But there are people that still speak Hopi. There's still people that speak Chemehuevi. You know, those languages are still there, and they're being now they're being embraced. I mean, Dene is a language that is taught in Blanding. in school, in a public school now. That's not a school on the tribe. On the reservations, there has been they do teach their indigenous languages. So it is being built up again, and language is critical. Language holds culture, because everything that we say is conceptualized through the words that we say. So just like myself and Jacob, we have been colonized. And so we have a way of thinking that comes through the lens of English words. So we conceptualize it through English words. If you really want to get to the heart of your culture, you have to conceptualize things through your own language, because words don't mean the exact same things. They have different contexts, different values. So I'm happy to say that language is coming up, and I'm happy that people have hung on this panel here for so long. Good job.
Thank you, everyone, so much for being here today.
Priya, did your question get answered? I was wondering if you'd want to say it out loud if you still had a bugging one, because I did see you had a few questions.
Yeah, it pretty much got answered. I was just asking because I actually had no knowledge of having any indigenous blood or anything, and I wasn't expecting to. And I found that I did through ancestry, and like my fifth great grandfather was 100% indigenous, and everywhere above him, every person was indigenous. But after that, I'm assuming he had a kid with a slave or something like that. But basically, so then from then on, they were slaves. And my grandmother on that side, she had no idea. And I just thought it was interesting because she makes fry bread, and like she's always made it, but we didn't like think of it or interpret it in that way, like coming from that culture. But yeah, I just was wondering, like, how do you navigate like finding out like there is like parts of your family and some of your ancestors that have been like chief leaders and things like that, and like wanting to be proud because like they are your ancestors, but at the same time, like I clearly don't look as if I would be native, and like my family hasn't grown up in that and stuff like that. So just kind of like being proud of like some things that my ancestors that were my grandparents, well, great grandparents, but and knowing that they were clearly just, that whole line was just gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, welcome to the club. Even though I said it's not a club, but I would just do some research to find out who those people were. And then
Yeah, I went down such
yeah,
a rabbit hole of just learning and like being so amazed and
I would go find out who those people are, and then I'd go and visit those lands and put your hand down on the ground and be like, I'm home, and then practice learning how to introduce yourself in that language and share that knowledge that, my great grandfather was from so and so, and these are his clans, or these were his people, and these are his lands. And then support that community. Go and volunteer for that community when you can. Write a check for $5, write a check for $10,000, and send that money to that community and say, this is my way of giving back to my home. Because something that Indigenous people thrive on, and that we always do, is a circle. And we always come back home, whether to find ourselves or to get back on our feet, or maybe to stay for a while, but we're always going like this. I always go home. I'm always going home, because those are my land. Those are where I'm from. That's my community. And I ran for tribal council. I lost by 12 votes. I was supposed to be into council, but I lost, and I'm going to run again in the future. But, it's always going back to where you come from, and find that piece, that root, and let your children know that. And
yeah, I'm trying to tell like my older relatives that are on my grand's side, kind of just like about their history, just because they don't know, because it was so close to like during the slavery times that a lot of their information was not written down or recorded, or the indigenous sides of them was written down as mulatto and then just Black. So there was just a lot of lost knowledge about cultures and things like that.
It looks like you're on track of doing the work to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying.
I think it's beautiful, and it's a beautiful, I want to attribute that to the indigenous culture, you know, that happened a lot where, you know, a lot with the Seminole people, especially, where, you know, slaves would go and they would bring them in. The Seminole people would bring them in, you know, and say, hey, come live with us, you know, and do it in a respectful way. And I'm sure that there was a reciprocity there that happened. Again, it's just an acknowledgement that indigenous people have historically always been welcoming, inviting, and trying to take care of each other. I mean, the number one way I think that indigenous people show that is by feeding each other, you know. And, you know, at ceremonies like what Jacob's talking about, like getting blanketed, you know, like clothing them, putting that blanket on them, you know, saying that, yes, you know, we care about you. We want you to be warm. We want you to be protected. We want that. So, I mean, everything that Jacob said, just figure out what you can, but also just, I mean, again, you don't have to be indigenous, Native American indigenous to Turtle Island to be important, you know, but it is good to know who you are, because when you know who you are, those where your roots are, and that's where you're going to find the best connection to the creator, or the spirituality is that, because that's for you, that's unique. All those ways to connect with the divine are all in the culture.
And find those influencers on IG. I just dropped one in the chat there. She's half, I think she's mostly Black, but she looks Black, and she is from a Cree nation. And so, you know, and she opens up conversations about being mostly Black, but also having indigenous, and how to, you know, be respectful in that space. And so follow these people and just copy what they're doing, and start to form that connection and lay those roots down.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up, but since CJ has stuck it through, just wondering, is it helpful or harmful for people of other cultures to learn indigenous languages? Yes, no, why? Let's keep it quick.
As long as you're not making a profit off of it, or you're not, you know, you're not speaking on behalf of those tribes, I think it's okay. But, you know, again, usually once you learn a culture, you want to like start teaching it, or you want to start becoming that person, and then all of a sudden you're getting into places that you wouldn't normally get, and you're using these native tribes to stand on their shoulders. Don't do that.
It's all about the intention.
I think that it's important, especially in the realm of academia and anthropologists, cultural anthropologists. So when, you know, a lot of our history is all written down in English, and it was interpreted through English. So it would be really good if these anthropologists who are writing these things knew the language, so that they can know the difference between the English word and other word, which is really, really hard, because they're going to come from English background context. But learning that language is very, very important.
Right. Well, I guess with that, we're going to wrap up. So thank you everyone for coming. We're going to have a list of resources too that we can send out, I believe, to participants, Janessa. Yep. So we'll do that. We're also going to post the session on YouTube. Follow our account, D.I.V.A. I'm sure, hopefully you already are. And then, as we talked about today, let's turn this into action. So follow Pandos, follow SLC Air Protectors, you know, get involved with local movements like Bears Ears, Line 3, Standing Rock, And yeah, we just want to thank Carl and Jacob so much for coming today and sharing. And yes, follow on Instagram. Instagram is a great place for resources. We share a lot on our story. We'll continue to do that. So thank you all again for being here today.
I'll repost Carl and Jacob's Instagrams on D.I.V.A right now, but they are doing this work for us pro bono. So for your call to action for some compensation today, I want you all to commit to doing one thing for SLC air protectors or for pandos. I want to see y'all out there. We've been in a pandemic, but we're going to be able to be more active this upcoming year. So I just need y'all to make a commitment that you are going to stand in solidarity with Indigenous communities and really call to action and be there on the ground to help us and support. Thank you all for your attendance, and thank you so much for your time, Jacob and Carl. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you, everybody. Go quiet.
See you, Gus. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your days.